All right. Just gonna close some windows, get my little Word file up. And yeah, I should put the comments on so I can see those coming in.
Right back.
Okay, and here we are live with Kirk A. Johnson and Milton Davis. Sarah Macklin will be joining us soon. Yeah, hey, hello to anybody who's watching. I don't know if anybody's in yet, but we'll get started proper soon. Might as well begin on introductions while we're here. Milton, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself to folks?
Okay, well, my name is Milton Davis. I am an author / publisher, owner of MV Media. I specialize in science fiction and fantasy based on African diaspora cultures and traditions. Been doing this thing for about 15 years now. Actually, 15 years as of May. And I've got 26 novels, 26 books that I've written. Not all of my novels, some of short story collections. And I've published, edited about 11 anthologies, soon to be 12. And although I spread myself around in different genres and stuff, I consider Sword and Soul / Sword and Sorcery to be my wheelhouse. That's where I love. That's what I love to do the most.
God, man, you are hardworking. I've just edited one issue of one magazine, and I'm like, oh, I can't imagine doing
Milton knows how to get it in.
Yeah.
We call it a catalog right about now on you right now.
Well, when your kids are grown and nobody wants anything to do with you got plenty of time.
I know, man, because first my niece and nephew probably be taking my books from, like, why don't y'all buy one? Y'all got money. Just support the man and just buy it. Don't take my copies.
Speaking of Kirk, would you mind introducing yourself to folks?
I am Kirk A. Johnson, the man behind Farfield Press. As you see, nice little cards out.
Oh yeah, I thought you were just checking. Like, I am Kirk.
Love this logo. Yeah, no, I was drinking last night. I was drinking last night, not this morning. But yeah, that's the logo. I've been recently. Started writing about 2005, 2004, 2005. Really seriously getting into writing. Mm-hmm. I'm also, as Milton, playing in the wheelhouse of Sword and Soul and Sword and Sorcery, as well though as cosmic horror. So I really enjoy cosmic horror and all those other subgenres of horror, except for gore punk. I don't know what that's about. I can't get into it. Gore punk is just not my thing. So I've been in a game. Just released my first book last year called The Obanax.
Yeah, I got a copy here for those watching as well as listening. Obanax and Other Tales of Heroes and Horrors. And while I'm showing off people's books, I might as well show off if I remember correctly, Kirk, please correct me if I'm wrong, this was your first short fiction publication, was in the Sword and Soul Anthology, published by Milton Davis, featuring his own writing, of course, and that of Charles Saunders, amongst many other distinguished individuals.
Awesome experience. And
hey, here we go, Sarah.
Hey, Sarah.
Hello. Hey, Sarah.
Hey. No, good timing. We just got through Kirk saying hello. Milton's introduced himself. So if I can just throw you into the deep end as soon as you arrive, would you mind introducing yourselves to people who have joined us? Yourself. Why do I keep pluralizing that? Anyway, so Sarah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah A. Macklin. I am the author of The Royal Heretic, Bride of the River God, as well as several short stories. My first writing love was Sword and Soul, even though I didn't realize I was writing it. And I'm just an all-around fantasy girl, comic geek, comic maker, and artist.
Awesome. Now I have physical copies of the other guys' books. I was flashing. I don't have a physical copy of yours. Kevin, will this work? Can you put up the cover of Sarah's book, The Royal Heretic, on the screen? Or will we accidentally make the whole call blow up? I don't know. Let's see what's happening here. Oh, no. Well, we see Kevin.
Yeah, let me give this a quick check, see if I can do this. So.
Sorry, everybody. This is one of our very first live streams. We're still figuring out the nuts and bolts of it. Oh,
no,
boy.
Not.
Hey, Kevin. There you go. The Royal Heretic. Milton has a copy.
All right, here we're just.
There we go. You know what? Never mind. Everybody look at Milton's screen there. Thank you, Milton. Sorry, I don't have a visual copy, so I messed up.
Sorry, I don't have a Kindle with me.
Royal Heretic. There we go. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. Yeah, it's really lovely to have all three of you together here. It's really nice to have like a panel discussion. Just as a host, it's nice. It's more relaxing. Take some pressure off me. I've got more people to talk. It's great. And Sarah, thank you so much for your resharing. Yesterday on Twitter, we had a really good day on the Kickstarter. And you contributed to that by sharing the link. And I saw some other people pick it up and some backers come in that were definitely coming off of you sharing that. So that was pretty cool. We went from like 79% in the morning to 85 by dinner. Felt good. And we're at 86 as we record this. And as long as we don't get any cancellations, I think we'll hit 87 later today. So yeah, which I suppose I should mention just in case somebody's stumbling upon this thing for the first time. I'm Oliver. I'm Oliver Brackenbury, editor of New Edge Sword and Sorcery, which I'll flash our issue 0 on the screen. A new magazine, which currently, as you can guess from what I was saying a second ago, is running a Kickstarter live now until 8 a.m. Saturday, March 4th, at which point I will relax and cheer or cry. We'll find out. But I think I'll be cheering. I'm feeling pretty good after yesterday. But yeah, we'll be doing that to fund 2 more issues, which will feature new original fiction by Kirk A. Johnson and Sarah Macklin, as well as what I assume, based on this track record, will be an excellent piece of nonfiction by Milton Davis, profiling the father of Sword and Soul, who his book I've got handy here is his most famous one, Charles Saunders, his book Amaro, which I think it's fair to say the whole panel here, myself included, strongly recommend people check out.
Yes, absolutely.
So so I got a whole bunch of questions, but if you guys think of something you just want to riff, throw it out there. I won't mind. I think we'll start with you, Sarah, if it's okay. I'm going to go even a little broader than Sword and Soul and just say Sword and Sorcery in general. What qualities of it draw you as a reader and a writer? What pulled you in?
You said with Sword and Sorcery in general?
Yeah, just the whole thing. It can be Sword and Soul more specifically if you want, but I mean, just the whole last thing.
Well, Sword and Sorcery is what I grew up reading. My first books were by Mercedes Lakey. So like a lot of the classic, one character is a magician, one character is a swords person is what my foundation was based on. And of course, with Mercedes Lakey, most of these characters were women. So it just came naturally that practically all of my duos were women. So, and then of course, being the obstinate child I was, of course, there's got to be a Black girl because I am going to play in these worlds. I don't care what anybody thinks. So if there was someone who said, you can't do that, I was the child that said, okay, watch me. So so I just it came from a desire to play in these worlds. And the more I learned about African history, the more I wanted to create worlds that reflected my heritage. So even now I'm trying to think of one that would take place more in my home state of South Carolina, which is my people live near Charleston. So we have a lot of Gullah influences, and there's a lot of carryover culture from Africa that's still alive today. So that's just something I want to play with.
That's awesome. Now, for those who aren't familiar with it, before we move on to the other two, what would the Gullah influences entail?
The Gullah Geechee are a group of people that run from, I think, the bottom of North Carolina up until about the Savannah region of Georgia. So that whole coastal area, you'll find a lot of sea islands that were separated from the mainland coast and culture. So a lot of their native West African and Central African cultures were allowed to flourish and meld and become something entirely new. So just from me learning that a lot of the words that I learned from relatives that still live down there were African layover words, but they're words that are just in my natural southern South Carolina vernacular. So, like a lot of the dishes that you hear about from Charleston, like shrimp and grits and red rice and the red beans and rice and dishes like that, are adaptations of native West African and Central African foods. So it's an entirely separate culture that has thrived and unfortunately is a little bit endangered today because of, well, the southern version of gentrification. So hopefully more people will pick it up and embrace their roots so it can continue on.
Well, I mean, I would be interested certainly to read a story that you would weave that into, and even for the specifics that you've described, but also broadly, I think food doesn't get covered a lot in Sword and Sorcery. You run into that more like epic high fantasy stuff, people aping hobbits, you know, talking about food endlessly, or maybe more YA stuff, kind of like Redwall and those books, endless descriptions of feasts. But you don't often get much more than Conan ate a big leg of meat and then, you know, punched a guy and we move on. So, you know, getting some like specificity, some culture into the food, I think is a real cool angle. Kirk, what's your brief origin story with Sword and Sorcery? Now, you and I talked on the podcast, but let's assume people watching now are not familiar with that recording.
Well, it started. Let me see. As far as I can go, far back as I remember, started with really the Sword and Sandal movies from back in the day. Watching that on TV with my dad, watching Hercules, Steve Reeves' Hercules, and pretty much that'd be my favorite genre at that point. And then I'm already like watching monster movies from back in the day, and then discovering Conan in Marvel Comics. You know, being the only kid in the neighborhood who didn't get X-Men or Spider-Man or any of those cats. I was the only one getting either Conan the Barbarian or Warlord with on DC Comics. And really just getting into that pre-industrial ancient world milieu that I really gravitated towards. I think it had a lot to do with the swords, to be honest with you. I collect them swords with, you know, watching those kind of movies with my dad and stuff, and really being fascinated with that, just the ancient world and history. Awesome. And yeah, and like Sarah was saying, it's you know, you don't see us in there. So, you know, and these are comics I'm reading, so I'm always looking visually for the one black character in the story, and you hardly ever see him in Sword and Sandal on TV. So when I discovered literature and started reading stuff and finding characters not specifically described, they're black to me then. You know, and that's how I just kept going.
How about you, Milton? What was your gateway drug for Sword and Sorcery at large?
You know, when I initially talk about it, I usually talk about the Conan comics with Marvel. I've always been a big history buff, love history and get nerd out on certain parts of history. But I was kind of an indirect comic book fan. I read some comic books, but my cousin and my best friend were like really deep into comics, and they were the one to introduce me to the Conan books because they knew I was like, you know, that kind of thing. But when I started reading the novels, I kind of got a little disappointed with some of the descriptions I saw, because the novels, like Marvel kind of like softened some things, you know, when they did the illustrations and stuff. And so you didn't get the real full Conan until you read the novels and stuff. And that kind of like, and kind of like Kirk and like Sarah, I'm like looking where I am. Although I can say that Robert E. Howard did incorporate some black people into his stories. It's just how he did it, which was, you know, kind of like, you know, made me feel a little uncomfortable. But then I just jumped down the rabbit hole. I read the Elric books. You know, I read just about everything that was involved with, you know, Sword and Sorcery. I got into all these different books and stuff like that, and still, you know, looking to see my historical culture represented. And it wasn't until the 90s when I went through, I call it my African Renaissance, when I tried to learn everything about African history and culture, when I started coming with the ideas of writing something like this. And played around with it for years until I finally sat down and started writing it and stuff. But I like that historical aspect to it. I like learning about historical cultures and how people lived. And it's just fascinating to me. And to be able to take that and incorporate it in that into a fictional background is even more, because I want people to like history like I do. Yeah. And one of the best ways to do it, I found out, is through fiction. If I sat there and read dates to you all day, your eyes would glass over. But if I talk about a place that Changa visited because he was doing on this adventure, then all of a sudden you're interested in that place because you're interested in what Changa does. Right. I actually had a person that after I let out the first Changa Safari book, I had a guy from Australia get in contact with me, and he actually did research on East African Swahili cultures after he read Changa, because before he read Changa, he didn't even know that existed. And so that's the kind of thing that makes me smile, because now I'm exposing somebody to a part of history that they never really thought about or realized, and they're coming to it with interest because it relates to something that they care about.
And yeah, exactly. They've got those memories of reading your characters and being like, okay, I can engage with this on a personal level. Now I want to go learn those dates, learn those events and kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And when I had a chance to meet Charles Saunders, that was a monumental moment. It was kind of made me angry too, because I was like, this guy had this stuff out all this time and I didn't even know anything about it. This book came out in the late 70s. That's around the same time I was getting into Robert E. Howard and the Eric books and different things like that, And so, but and to read Amaro and just see the way that he was doing everything that I wanted to see done. I even tell people sometimes, if I had read Amaro, I probably would have never written so and so, because I would have got what I was looking for.
They're intimidated.
No reason for me to do it now. It's right there, and it's doing better than I could ever do it, kind of thing.
You could always use more. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before we went live, and for those listening and watching who aren't familiar, Charles Saunders, he suffered essentially. I'm going to compress a lot of this down. There's more detail, but as I understand it, he really suffered from just some bad luck with publishing and promotion. He was not put out there the way he should have been, and as a result, his initial trilogy of Amaro books 2 and 3 didn't come out for sale until 1 was out of print or something stupid, and so you just all kinds of stuff like that just really sabotaged getting his name out, getting his stories out, which is such a shame. Played a role, perhaps, Milton and you not discovering him until much later. And talking about discovery of Sword and Soul, why don't we come around to Sarah again? And Sarah, what would you say, we talked about Sword and Sorcery at large. When did you first start picking up and getting into Sword and Soul? Was it Charles Saunders or was it something else?
I kind of did it just out of my own want to and see Black people in such a milieu. I want to see Black people as wizards. In fact, I have a T-shirt that I got from Fire Magazine, the magazine of Black speculative fiction, that says, Black wizards, Black warlocks, Black demons, Black gods, Black angels, everything. And it was just, I started writing as a teenager and putting more Black characters in my stories. It didn't matter if I had a white protagonist, there was going to be Black characters in this story, to the point where I was like, you know what? Why am I writing about white main characters? Why don't I just write about a Black main character? Who says I can't write about a Black main character? And since fantasy is my love, it just seemed natural to, look into more of, the African histories and draw from that and what a medieval world would look, but looking towards these cultures. And then I forgot which community I ran across Mr. Milton. And it was like, wait, there are other people doing this too. Oh my gosh. There's a word for this. Oh my gosh. So I was like, at that point, it was like, yes, all of it. I'm writing all of it.
No, I'm sorry, sir. I've had my short-term memory just sandblasted by working on the Kickstarter every waking second for the last few weeks. I know I read this at some point, and I just can't remember anymore. Was your first publication with Milton, or am I getting mixed up?
No, it was. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was. My first publication was my first short story, and my first novel was with Milton. because
Awesome.
my first short story was Marked in the Griots 2 anthology, and then The Royal Heretic was my debut novel.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'm curious in your journey towards going, you know what, I want to write, Black protagonists, God damn it. Was there a particular text? Like I say, what did you read Charles Saunders and Morrow and then go, I want to do this? Or did you maybe watch a movie and just like something, or was it more gradual? Was there not like a light switch moment, or more just a slide into it?
It wasn't, because let's see. Well, my first characters I attempted to write in Sword and Sorcery was basically a self-insert of me and my best friend from 6th grade. Just
Awesome.
rub the serial numbers off.
Yeah.
Because it was a white girl who was like 6 feet tall, and this little black girl who was, of course, the only black girl at school, and that was me in most of my classes. But it's like, as I developed that character into, her own character instead of just my playful self-insert, I started coming up with her family and then her village and then her culture. And it was like, I want to do more of this more than I want to do the black kid who's the only kid in this environment. So it's like, I'm like, why not?
Yeah.
It's like this, I'm more interested in writing this than what I've always read.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, and then it's like, where are all the black protagonists? Where are all the black women with magic? So it's like, what's the quote? If you can't find a book you want to read, then you have to write it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it came from my need to see the stories that I wanted to read. And if nobody else is going to write it, then gosh darn it, I'm going to write it.
Said like a true writer. Yeah, no, awesome. Kirk, where did you first start picking up the pen and stuff? Now, I do remember, but only because I've done a full interview with you before. You also found your first short fiction publication with Milton in Griot 1, right?
Right. Which was, thank you so very much, Milton, for that. Always. I in college, I was in terms of writing, I was taking screenwriting classes in college. So I would write, short films and stuff with weird shit happening to my character in Brooklyn. So I didn't really pick up like writing Sword and Sorcery, Sword and Soul until I read Charles Saunders. So, when I picked up Amaru and I started, actually it was watching, it was, I can't get it. I'm trying to remember the name of this website. I think it was on DodgeNet, and shit, man, it was like Heroes of Dark Fantasy or something like that nature. And the guy had a nice pages list of Sword and Sorcery heroes. So they had one that I already know. You already know Conan, and I already know Fafhrd and the Great Mouser.
Yeah.
And then I saw like Amaru down there, and I was like, and I knew Kane. I was like, oh, Amaru, I never heard of that one. So when I clicked it and I saw this big page of this brother with a turban and a sword and everything, and I was like, holy shit, this is real. My bad, so I didn't mean to curse, but I mean, like, that just blew me away, and I had to find out more what was going on, doing the research, going in, and that's when I really started like picking up the pen and said, I can actually be a part of this. You know what I mean? Because I had that dry spell in high school. In high school, got a dry spell where it was partying, women, the teenage stuff.
Yeah.
Right? I just went in on the teenage life. But in college, I started just gathering more in terms of reading more, maybe, just thinking more, playing more with my imagination of other things that can be possible in my life than just sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah.
So,
and because to what we were talking about earlier with like the publication issues and lack of decent promotion, you didn't. Oh,
something turned on.
Oh, sorry, man. I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No. All right.
I think audio came on.
Oh, okay. Sorry, man. We had a hiccup there, I guess. But yeah, what I was gonna say was
Okay,
you know, Amaro was out and around in the early 80s, but you didn't find him until the 2000s, right?
Yeah. It's like in the 2000s, and I went on Amazon and bought, like, I want to say I bought the first book, read it, and then I bought the second one. I remember the second one also being for sale, so I got that as well. And then I bought another copy of them. So I have like 2 copies of each of the original stories,
Nice.
really books. One 3 of them in plastic, and the other one is out.
Yeah.
Those are very important. Those are so important in terms of just, you know, I imagine what I'm going through, there's somebody else going through it.
Yeah.
And seeing this opened me up to the idea of not, you know, there's spaces that you can be a part of. You know what I mean? What you love, your passion, what you found so interesting and engaging, you're not, you don't see yourself represented in them. Right. And then when you do see yourself represented in them, that was like a light bulb, like, oh shit, oh, I can actually be in this really. I can I can create in here. I don't have to like use it as, you know, like throwaway entertainment. It's no longer throwaway entertainment. That's what I mean. Now it's like I can be a fan of something.
Yeah.
I can really get into this. And that was Charles Saunders. I'm so sad I didn't get a chance to ever really meet him or chat with him.
Yeah. And I know there's a lot of work being done by various parties trying to figure out the rights situation to his work so they can be collected and published again. But we'll see what happens there. I mean, I think we're all rooting for it, that's for sure.
I'm rooting for a hardcover for his book. So
yeah. And also maybe collect some of the harder to find stories, like the Desoye tales that were in the Amazon and the Sword and Sorcerers collection, stuff like that, right? Like the stories maybe are a little harder to track down. Or there's like a
there's an anthology. There's a
but is it in print?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. My mistake. Pardon me.
No, right. I think I remember because I have it.
Oh no, it exists, but I just thought maybe like a lot of the other stuff that Saunders did, like, you know, the rights have kind of lapsed and it's harder to get a copy.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry.
Around secondhand.
Yeah.
So I'm saying I want like new collective publications. But Milton, you did have the good fortune to meet and work with Charles. Where was why don't we kind of like blend 2 questions here? Where was your beginnings of writing your own Sword and Soul tales? And was it reading Charles, or was it later getting to work with Charles? Like, or was it nothing to do with Charles at all? Where was the beginning of that for you?
Well, I began attempting to write Sword and Soul back in the 90s. That was the same time I was going through my my African history renaissance, and it was actually a historical fiction novel that sparked me. It was a book called Segu by Maurice Condé, and it was basically a historical fictional book based on a family in Africa. If you hadn't asked, if I hadn't talked about it, I could have talked about the particular tribe of people that would come. But it was basically talking about pardon?
The Bamana.
Yeah, the Bamana. The Bambara. And it was it was talking about this family and what they were going through during the early 19th century. All these different influences, you know, from the Europeans, from different African tribes, and each person in the family kind of represented something that was happening during that time. It was the first time I ever read any type of fiction based on African culture and history, and that just blew me away. And it was like, I say, this is what I want to do. This is what the kind of writing I want to write. And that's around the time where I actually started with the idea of writing Meji, my first novel. That's when I started doing the research for Meji. And that took forever because I had a lot of start and stops. There were people I was working with from an artistic standpoint that were there and disappeared and all kind of stuff like that. And it wasn't until 2005 where I really sat down and got serious about doing all this. And it's funny because that's around the same time that I met Charles. I had been researching because something was telling me there's somebody else that has had to have done this before. I'm not one of those people that feel like, you know, especially when it comes to stuff with Black creativity, is that there's one person that just hadn't done it yet. My thing is more there are people that have been trying to do it, but because of the powers that be and the gatekeepers, they've been prevented from doing it. And so I kept saying somebody had to do this before, just too much information out of it. And around the time that Nightshade decided to re-release the Amaro books, that's when Charles started popping up everywhere. And I tried to get in contact with Nightshade, say, hey, I'm kind of naive about the business. I thought I just talked to somebody and say, hey, I want to get in contact with this writer, and they would actually give me their information. I thought it was that simple.
Oh man, I wish it was that easy. Somebody who's putting together a
but of
table of
course,
contents.
of course, until I heard nothing from Nightshade. But then, when Nightshade decided to drop the books, a friend of mine, that we call Urias, he announced in this forum I was in that he would be picking up the publishing of the Amaro books. And I was like, oh man, him and I were pretty good friends. I said, man, you actually know Charles Saunders? He's like, yeah, man. I said, well, can you get me in contact with him? And so, he talked to Charles and we exchanged a couple of emails. And at the time I was working on Meji, and I finally finished Meji. So I asked him if he would take a look at it, expecting him to say no, but he said yes. And then he read it, and then I found out that he liked it. And so at that point, that's kind of how our relationship started. And it was from that relationship that most of all of my stories, novels from that time point came from. Griots was actually a result of a discussion that he and I had about other authors that were probably trying to do the same thing that we were doing, publish, African-based sword and sorcery stuff, but they weren't getting the opportunity. And that's why we created that anthology. That actually was my first anthology. And that's the anthology that Kirk was in. And we got people who had never written Sword and Soul and were giving it a shot, people who had written stories 20, 30 years ago and had tried to get them published but couldn't. And now here was a venue for them to do that. And we had a variety of stories, of main characters. But then the second anthology, we decided, hey, let's do one that focused on Black women as main characters, because at the time, the only Black woman that had a sword that was in Sword and Sorcery was Desoye. And Charles had created that character as well for the Amazon anthology. He had been approached saying, look, can you create a character? He said, look, yeah, I can. So that's what he created Desoye for. And that's when I had the chance to publish Sarah. And I read her story marked, and I said, man, this is great. And that's why it was the first story in the anthology. because Sarah brought it. She came, and I was like, this is what I'm talking about right here. And so everything that we did together was based on trying to expose more people to Sword and Soul. The Sword and Soul moniker was something that he came up with when he was in an interview one time. Somebody asked him to describe what he wrote, and he called it Sword and Soul. And I got a chance to publish some of his books that had been unpublished before. The short story collection, New Body Tales, that Kirk mentioned. That was another project that he always wanted to do that I had a chance to publish as well. And so that was actually helping him complete his legacy, which he wanted to do more.
That's beautiful. One thing I've really enjoyed, I'm so early in my own journey as an editor, but one thing I've really enjoyed is the opportunity to treat creatives the way I myself, a writer, like to be treated. And then I just think about how next level that must have been, for I'm sure you also enjoyed that, but how next level it would be to turn around to someone who's inspired you, who's come before you, and treat them well and help them, as you say, complete their legacy. That's wonderful.
The biggest challenge that you run into as a Black writer, and that we ran into with Sword and Sorcery, and that Charles ran into with Amaro, is that his stories were being published through a lot of small periodicals during the 70s. I have the opportunity to have a copy of some of those things. But for some odd reason, when somebody decided to publish them as novels, they had to change it. All of a sudden, now everybody was concerned about the audience. Now, the audience has been reading this stuff just like it is. Some of the earlier magazines has them Amaro with big afros and stuff like that. But for some odd reason, when we got to the novel level, all of a sudden we had to make it more palatable for a certain audience. And that's how Amaro got hurt. Instead of just taking the stories and publishing them as they were, describing it as they were, the publishers at the time felt like they needed to do something to kind of make the audience, more acceptable and more accepting of it and stuff. And I feel like that's what hurt him early on. There was another author a few years ago who came out with a story that was kind of African based. And he kind of tried to use Amaro as an example of that. If you base something on African culture, it wouldn't be successful. And the approach that he took was totally wrong. But, I didn't want to get into a debate about it, but at the same time, I could tell that so you can't really base things that happen in publishing the success or failure of something because something wasn't good or because the audience didn't accept it. It was something. A lot of times it has something to approach, but that's a different subject. But another thing that I wanted to touch on was on when Sarah was talking about her journey, and she mentioned something that I think a lot of Black creatives go through. Is that, you write and you create based on what you see. And it's interesting that sometimes us as Black creators, when we start to create something, we create stuff with a white main character because that's what we're used to seeing. Yeah. I know a lot of Black artists did the same thing. I had one Black artist friend of mine that said when he decided to get into artwork, he had to learn how to draw Black people because everything that he did was based on the white characters that he saw. And even my first story, the story that eventually became Changa Safari, started out as Changa not being the main character.
Really?
There was another main character because I was basing it off this. I can't remember the name of the Conan story. It's the one Conan story where this boy and his dog are like fighting the pigs, and Conan just kind of shows up in the middle of the story. And I like the way the fact that in this story, Conan wasn't the main character. He was just like one of the secondary characters. And so I said, I want to write something like that. And so I started like that. And then all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, why am I making this character, the character that looks like me, the secondary character? And so I said, let's switch this bad boy around. and that's the story that eventually became Changa Safari, just switching it around like that. But we have to go through that. Some of us have to go through that process, to where we have to kind of like evolve in this whole thing about representing ourselves in these subjects. And I like the fact now that since we've been doing it for so long, that we have a generation of young writers coming up and creators coming up that don't have to go through that process because they've been seeing it the entire time, know. And so it's a natural flow for them to do it as opposed to us having to take those extra steps to get where we were to be creative.
That too must be very gratifying. Also, for people like me who had their memory kind of tweaked, I was like, "What Conan story was that?" It was Beyond the Black River.
Yeah, that's it. That's the one. I remember that. That was probably my favorite Conan story. Because of the way it was told.
Western feel to it,
It does. Like on the frontier, the pics of big, all that kind of thing.
And I love that dog too. I mean, any story with a good dog in it. All right. Well, we've been talking a lot about the broad strokes of all the reasons one would want to have stories rooted in secondary worlds or primary or our own. To do more with various forms of Black and African culture, not just Western or medieval. Why don't we get more specific? Sarah, let's start with you. Now, you talked a little bit about the Gullah thing. Maybe if you want to go deeper on that or talk about something else, but what would be just something fun that, in your research, or in your lived experience you want to bring into the writing that you think is particularly interesting, some cool historical facts, some neat cultural thing? What is a specific thing that you think is pretty neat that you have seen in Sword and Soul or want to bring into Sword and Soul?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
We can circle back if you want. Give you some time.
Yeah, come back to me.
All right. You think about that. Kirk, you're up.
No, see that? When she said that, and I was thinking, oh, that's a really, really hard one. And she's like, hey, come back to me. I was like, oh, no.
Well, you know what? We can go to the history nerd. Kirk, we'll give you a breather too. Okay, we'll go around. We'll hit on.
No.
I know he's ready.
No, I'll take it.
Okay. You go first.
So wait, tell me the question again.
So yeah, this could be from the open acts. It could be from anything. But what is a particularly specific thing that you've come across either in someone else's work or some of your own research that's gone into your stuff or maybe yet to go into your stuff to do with African Black culture that you think is a particularly cool piece of history or culture or both to weave into a Sword and Soul tale? Because we've been talking kind of broadly, right? So what's a thing or element or group or people or what?
Two things.
Food, music.
Realizing how ethnically diverse Africa really is, and how there's over 100 languages on the continent, over 100, and that blew my mind. Just the dearth of languages really that they have that's on the continent is astounding. Some of them we don't even. Some linguists can't even figure out yet. That's how, that and secret societies. Secret societies. I know if I remember correctly, I know the Leopard Society that they have in, I want to say, Nigeria and Ghana, and the rituals that they go through. I'm talking broad too. I mean, to be honest, it's just my head is so full of them. There's so many different things about the continent.
Yeah. But no, that's a great place. I mean, secret societies, how sword and sorcery is that?
Yeah. Fun fact, Nubia has the most pyramids.
Oh, nice.
The most pyramids are in Nubia in Sudan. Those are as burial as tombs. As tombs. They're the most, and that's. And you gotta come back to me, man. There's so many. I got so many jiggling in my head right about now.
No, it's all good. I mean, like I said, the secret societies are great. That's something I would love to learn more about. I have a very surface level understanding of some research I did for something I didn't end up writing. But yeah, the Leopard Society. You're right. Yeah, Nigeria.
Metallurgy.
Yeah.
After there's I don't want to say sub-Saharan. I hate that term, but I want to lower the Sahel and south of the Sahel. Developing their own, developing iron smelting without having going through the step of learning how to use bronze.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So go from Stone Age straight into the Iron Age, and that's below the Sahel. It's south of the Sahel. So north you have this, Egypt went through a Bronze Age, and Sudan, the Nok culture in Nigeria went through an Iron Age. So that's also cool. Yeah.
Yeah, no, dude.
And iron and iron by itself is not good for making weapons.
No, you gotta alloy it, right?
Yeah, you gotta add charcoal, you gotta add a carbon to it, make it steel because it chips at the edges and stuff. So that was a cool part too. Oh wow.
Oh, cheers. No, man, you got it. All right, I'll take you off the hot seat, Milton. Right. I know you're ready for this. Any number of things just from like one Changa book, I'm sure. But what would you like to share?
I think I'm with Kurt on the fact that just the diversity of the cultures in Africa was one of the things that I wanted to kind of highlight, which is what I did in my first book, Meji. I based each culture in Meji on a different culture in Africa. And I wanted to show that diversity in those cultures. And I brought cultures that in close proximity to each other that wouldn't have been like that on the African continent. Like the Sesu were based on the Zulu, and I had them connecting with cultures that were based on like West African cultures, like the Yoruba and different things like that. So being able to play with that was and it was fun to me. And again, exposing people to that. Right now, my biggest focus, which I've been teasing people with forever, is that I'm really into the kingdom of Mercuria. Mercuria developed in the region of Nubia. It was a Christian nation. Was one of the first kingdoms to actually defeat the Islamic movement across North Africa. They did it twice and ended up developing what they call a peace treaty called a Bak, which was one of the longest peace treaties in the world, lasted for like 700 years. And just being able to write about that culture and bring some eyes on it. This is the same area that the Egyptians called Tasseti, and they were known the land of the bow. And one of the reasons that they were so formidable was because of their archers. The Arabs call them the eye smiters because they would shoot people. They were known for shooting people in the eye. There's one story that the Arabs said that the Arabs would come out, and you know how warriors taunt each other. And the Mercurians would taunt the Arabs and say, "Where do you want us to shoot you with this bow?" And the Arab would be like, "Oh, in the elbow," and the guy would do it. So that's how good they were supposed to be, So, and just being able to write, to be able to write about that culture and talk about it and bring some I said some knowledge and some eyes on it, because they even were trying to contact some of the Christian units during the Crusades and stuff, because they were basically isolated from all the rest of the culture, all the rest of Christian cultures and stuff like that. So to be able to write about them and bring some focus on there, with at the same time pull on that culture for some great fantasy backgrounds and stuff like that. Think about it. These were people who had become a Christian nation, but at the same time, when they were traveling in this area, they were passing through ancient Nubian cultures like Meroe and stuff like that. And they were seeing these pyramids that Kirk talks about. So to talk about those cultures and how they developed and how they interact with each other to me, is a really cool background for writing like Sword and Soul and Sword and Sorcery.
Yeah, it just seems like there's just so much to dig into, and it's relatively untouched compared to, hey, you ever heard of medieval France?
I mean, honestly, I could sit down and write a standard sword and sorcery story. I could write a medieval story because I've been taught that all my life. I could sit down and write kings and queens and courts and squires and knights, and I could just do that, because we've been exposed to that through our education system. But it's different when you're sitting down and you're writing a story from a African culture, or even if I was writing a story from a traditional Chinese culture or Japanese culture or East Indian culture, because now you're dealing with different cultures, and you have to do the research on it and find out about it. And just by the details itself brings a freshness to the genre, because now you're dealing with the same thing. You're dealing with kings and queens and jealousies and stuff like that. But how people go about it is different, because now you're dealing with a different culture that has a different way to going about those things.
Yeah, and like I often hear in a variety of contexts this writing advice about specifics are universal. Sometimes people worry, if I make the story too particular to any one thing, nobody will be able to relate to it. They're not from this part of the world, or they don't, whatever. But I've enjoyed Amaro, and it's got, it's not rooted in anything to do with me. I've enjoyed all of your writing. You know what I mean? It's just, I think the specifics make it interesting. And then you still always got, as you were saying, underneath the universals of people's motivations. You still got kings. You still got people who are out to try and survive, out to try and make a living, whatever, Yeah.
If I could just throw some shine on my colleagues here, how I feel about what they write about. And the thing I really like about Sarah and the Royal Heretic is that she's writing something that's based on Egyptian culture, and you don't see a lot of that done in Sword and Sorcery, and the way that she handled that. That's what really got me excited about reading the Royal Heretic. It's probably one of the best novels I've written in that genre because of the way that she handles it and stuff like that. And as far as Kirk is concerned, when I read his new book, he does bring that element of cosmic horror into Sword and Soul that I haven't seen done a lot of, and I like the way that he blends those two together and tells his stories like that. So to see people like them come into the genre, that's why I'm so excited when I see a new author come into the genre, because I'm always looking at what are they going to bring to Sword and Soul to expand it and to tell the stories in a different ways than that's normally done. Because the one thing that Sword and Soul does have in common is the incorporation of spirituality into the storylines, because there's not a separation in African culture between your daily life and the spirituality, and that's the one common denominator that you see in most all Sword and Soul stories. Because if you're doing your research the right way, it's just only natural that's going to be there. And I'll be quiet now.
No, it's all good.
Right now. I noticed that too. I feel that's like one of the more important elements of Sword and Soul is the addition of spirituality and the context of spirituality within the cultures that you're creating. Like even in a secondary world, that's you're creating a secondary world, and you add those African influences and understandings of the continent into that world. Yeah, spirituality is definitely a big part of it.
Yeah, in most African cultures, the relationship between the living and the dead is unique and different, and it's not separated. It's a continuous thing, and it's one continues to support and affect the other, and that's a something that if you study African cultures, that it almost has to be there.
Yeah.
Interesting. Sarah, before I grill you on for historical specificities, would you like to talk to the spirituality aspect as well, or do you want to get to the historical thing?
Oh, this is one of the things that I've talked about in one of my writing groups as well. Is for I know Black people across the diaspora and for a lot of other cultures, what is considered magic for us is every day. There is a blending between not the spiritual or like the other worldly things and every day. You'll hear grandmothers talking about, I grew up with, if you're asleep and you felt like there was a weight on your chest, that was a haint. And it's like, oh, okay. And there's no question of that. It just is. Or if you're having a bad day, the old hag is riding you. It's just these common things that are not just, oh, a superstition, throw some salt and it'll be okay. No, these are things that are considered real and part of the world. It's a feeling that the spiritual and the physical aren't two separate things, but they affect each other. So it's like, I have a book and it's behind me on the shelf and I can't remember where it is, but talking about how African American Christianity naturally incorporated a lot of the rituals and so on from their African ancestors, and how we worship is a direct reflection upon all the different cultures that were suddenly mashed together into one people, and how there's a lot of honest paganism in our worship beliefs and practices and things that you can see the direct correlations. So it's like, that's something that if you don't find that in a Soul and Sword story, I have to kind of side eye, because if you read African myths, it's all there. You're walking down the road and you'll talk to a spirit. I have stories of someone was walking down the road and they talked to an angel. So it's like, it's one of those things that's just part and parcel with the genre.
I think it's really interesting because, like you look at most, sort of traditional Western stuff starring guys who vaguely resemble me, and it's like the other is very the other, right? It's so separate from daily life. It's so separate. And that's part of what makes it, like, especially read a lot of the classic guys from the 30s, cosmic horror, right? Kirk, like, it would be the thing that is so not us, the thing we can't understand. It is so separate. Right. And so to have it woven into daily life, like this spirituality, and I think it's kind of, it's a really intriguing difference that I definitely want to read more of and see more of. So Sarah, it's okay if the answer is I don't want to. But was there any particular piece of research that's come to mind while Kirk and Milton were talking about that from your own research?
Food.
Yeah, love it.
Especially because I love to cook. So after watching the Netflix documentary High on the Hog, I immediately went and bought the book. And the more I'm reading about it, and it's like, there's so many foods that she's talking about from the marketplaces, and I'm like, I've seen these foods. I know what these foods taste like, yet I have never set foot on the continent of Africa. So in the book I'm currently working on, is about to quote unquote African immigrants in the largest city in my secondary world. And one of the things I'm so enjoying is having a market scene and having one of the characters, this is his first home cooking he's had since his parents returned home. So it's like the connection of food and family and culture is something I love to integrate into my stories. And besides food, architecture, because growing up, you would have thought that Africa was devoid of any cities until the Portuguese arrived.
Well, it was aliens, right? And Atlanteans who built all that stuff.
Ancient aliens.
Yeah, ancient aliens, astronauts. Yeah.
So it's like learning about all the cities that were in Africa and learning different styles amongst the different separate cultures. And that's why in the Royal Heretic, I tried to make sure that each of the 3 major sections of the empire had their own specific kind of architecture to denote the cultures they had come from. So in that book, the northernmost culture, I have very loosely based on like Carthage. And then the southernmost culture, I have very loosely based on like the Ashanti and how their buildings and family compounds and such would have looked. So it's so much fun to take these things, these little details, and adapt them to a whole new world. And as Milton said, get people curious about real history in our world.
I very much appreciate and empathize with you saying very loosely based on, because the history nerds, right? They'll come for you. Milton and I talked about this a bit.
That's why I write fantasy and not historical fiction.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's very, very traditional sword and sorcery. I always think of an exchange between Fritz Leiber and Lovecraft back in the 30s, where Fritz Leiber was coming up with Lankhmar, but at that point it wasn't going to be Lankhmar; it was going to be Alexandria, right? And it was going to be it's in the real world. It eventually became the story Adept's Gambit, which is kind of known as the less, not a good one. But the point is, Lovecraft said to him, "Hey man, no, don't do Alexandria, because the history nerds will come for you. Make it your own thing. Give yourself some wiggle room, and it's probably going to be more interesting that way anyway, right?" So it's a good thing to do. We're coming around on an hour now. We're just about getting to the close. So I guess what I'd like to do is just kind of quickly run around the 3 of you, because Saunders, rightly so, gets mentioned and discussed a lot in the context of Sword and Soul. But I'm wondering, and Kirk, I'll hit you up first if that's okay, if there are other Sword and Soul authors or Sword and Soul adjacent that you would like to just bring to people's attention, whether they're contemporary or haven't written anything since the 70s, like whoever it is. Kirk, if I can go with you first.
Yeah. Oh, well, off the top of my head, Milton Davis and Sarah Mackin, they're awesome. Please pick those guys up.
I've heard of them, yeah.
Check them out. No, check them out. You will not be sorry. It's so awesome to do that. If anybody else, I would and lately, there's actually maybe a couple of people, but they're not Sword and Soul per se.
Well, maybe adjacent.
Yeah, like the Jelly Clark, who I've known a couple of times. He doesn't do it, but he's done it. I'll say that. Right? He's been in heroic. Yeah, he's actually in Heroic Fantasy Quarterly a couple of times also. So but his stuff is pretty powerful and it's awesome. Check that out. There's a young lady, Denise Tapscott, who does more horror, witches and gypsies. Actually, she has one, Voodoo Kisses and Gypsy Wishes, which is pretty good. I would check that out also.
Awesome. All right, Milton. I know you have a long list of names I'm sure you're thinking of, and I always feel bad when I put anybody on the spot to say, like, recommend some people, because it's always like, oh, I'm going to forget somebody. They're going to not like me after that happens. So just, with the caveat, this is just what's coming up to mind right now. Don't worry about trying to hit up everybody that you love in the world. Who's a few names that you'd like to check out, either contemporary or historical?
I always do bad on these things because I always forget somebody and think about it later on. But of course, like Kurt says, I would, check out Sarah's work. I would check out his work. I would add Fenderson, Jelly Clark as well. Fenderson actually has a story in Griots, and he has a story in Griots of the Spear. So he doesn't write it. I think he has a new book that's going to be coming out pretty soon that's kind of along the same vein. There's also Balogun Ojetade, who have a story about Once Upon a Time in Africa. Balogun is unique because not only is he a Yoruba priest, he's also an African martial artist. So you get details in his stories that you wouldn't normally get in some of our other stories because he's coming, I would say, probably closer to the culture, that type of thing. You had a wave of new people coming out a few years ago, who I don't know if you would really say they were sword and soul, but they had used African culture as their background. You know, Tony Annieme's books. One that I really like is I think his name is Edwin Winter, Rage of Dragons. That's an excellent series. His stuff is actually based on Xhosa culture. And the story is, it incorporates dragons because everybody likes dragons, but the details of his stories are really great. I love his stories. I read he has 2 books out right now and that I've read, and they're like relentless, action filled stories and there's so many individual authors that we have in griots. That the thing right now is that I'm looking for authors that are being more consistent, as far as publishing books in the genre. There are people that jump in and out. David Anthony Durham had his Acacia series, which was I would say probably more Eurocentric, but it is based on African culture as well. So there's a bunch of people that I know whose names I'm forgetting right now that yell at me. A lot of it has actually been done in comic books. Peter Daniel has a character named Cheoma, and his stuff was, if it was written novel wise, I would consider it sword and soul. I mean, I do consider it from a graphic novel standpoint. Again, based from African culture and traditions and stuff like that. So it's a lot of people. It's a pretty good amount of people out there doing it, but we always need more. We always welcome more.
Yeah, make more people aware of it. Sarah, who would you like to give a shout out here?
Y'all stole all my names.
That's the problem with going last with this question. Sorry.
It's like a lot of the unfortunately, a lot of the names I would think of naturally, they are genre hoppers like I am. So while they have done sword and soul in the past, they are not currently doing it as far as I know. But one I can think of off the top of my head, Devon Sanders, right. Excuse me.
Yeah.
He has a novella, She Who Hears All Whispers. Hold up. I got it right here.
There you go.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
Right.
I love his stuff. It's truly from the heart. He knows how to hit you in the chest. P. Jelly Clark knows how to kick you in the chest. Those are my favorite writers. Of course, Milton, who's the godfather of Sword and Soul. There's so many people whose names I cannot think of right now. But
that's okay. They're just quietly judging you for it.
Okay, I love them all. I'm so sorry. But if you want to collect writers, definitely go through griots and griots 2, because all of those stories are incredible. And if you have never read Sword and Soul before, that will give you the best introduction that you can get into the genre.
Yeah, and take it from an editor who did just that. Sarah is 100% correct. I read Kirk's story in Griot 1, and then I checked out the Open-Ox, and I was like, man, he's working on his craft. I can see some real quality improvement here. And I reached out, and here we are. So there you go. Yeah, in action. All right. Well, thank you all so much for giving me an hour of your time here. I don't want to take up too much more on your Saturdays, but it has been wonderful to get you together sort of in the room with me here. It's been real nice, Sarah, to meet you in quotation marks. I mean, we've been talking in email, but meet you, as before we get to work together. I'm gonna go out there. I'm gonna be comfortable enough to say we will get to work together. It will fun, positive thinking.
Yes.
You know, we're 86% last I looked. Maybe it went up while we've been talking, because that's always great, right? When you like go have a shower, you come back, and you know the Kickstarter goes up some more. But
yep.
And yeah, just you know, go around the table. Quick reminder for anybody, you know, this is their first exposure to this whole thing. You know, Kirk is going to have a new story. It's going to be kind of spear and fang, you know, more like prehistoric era,
right?
Sword and Soul. And if the title does not change, maybe it will. But for now, it's called Carnivora. We've got a small sample of it on the Kickstarter. You guys can check that out as a latest update. Milton will be doing a historical profile on Charles Saunders. You can get to learn about him in more detail than some of the stuff we just touched upon today. And Sarah will have a new work of short fiction, TBD. We haven't discussed it yet in terms of title and subject matter, but I wouldn't have asked Sarah on board if I didn't think it'd be great. So, yeah, I hope, stop it, Oliver. I know that people are going to get to read these issues and going to get to see you guys in it. And I just can't wait. I can't wait to work with you all in the editorial process, which I really enjoy. I love discussing story, going through crafting even narrative and nonfiction, you know. Yeah, it's going to be great. So, I've got nothing else. Sorry, I'm so fried from the last few weeks, guys. I'm so sorry. I keep trying to I mean,
you good?
Kirk
You good?
You've been on the podcast. You know that I know how to close these things normally. I'm just looking at y'all and be like, at some point, Oliver, you stop talking and the thing ends. That's how it works, and I can't end it. So thank you all. I'm just gonna say that. And thanks to everybody watching and listening. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'm just gonna throw it quick to the chat just in case. Anybody watching, I feel like we've been pretty thorough, but do you have questions to ask the panel? Kevin can throw the question up on the screen so people can see it and we can all talk. Or it can be like my grade 11 English class when the teacher would say that and everybody just stares at the front. Because that's fair. Maybe you all feel like you've heard everything and you're good.
Right.
Because we've been thorough. We've been really thorough. I appreciate that from you guys.
I think so.
Because yeah, okay, all right. So nobody's got any questions today. Whatever. If they throw them up late in the chat, you know, we can come back to it in the comments or whatever. So yeah, if you're seeing this as a recording later, throw questions in the comments and I'll see what we can do to address them. But yeah, again, thank you, Kirk, Milton, Sarah, for your time, and I'll talk to you later when we're figuring out your stuff in the magazine. All right, guys.
All right.
Awesome.
Take care.
Thanks. Peace,
Bye.
guys.
All right.